hello. Welcome back to another episode of Quick and Nerdy. As always, I'm your host, Brandon McCoy, technical advisor supporting our Veeam Cloud and service providers here at Veeam Software, located in Atlanta, Georgia. Today's video, as you can see, is VM backup job best practices. So no PowerPoint today. I'd rather point to the power of Veeam and the lab. So let's get right into it. There's a lot to cover, but I'll try to get through it rather quickly, keeping up with the essence of the Quick and Nerdy series. So this is for virtual machine backup jobs. I'll probably do some other videos on managing agents. Also, this is assuming that you're doing your standard backup job as opposed to a per VM backup job. A per VM backup job is where every VM in the job creates its own backup file. That is a setting you set at the repository level and a topic for another day. So here I have the name of a job, kind of just titling the, where it's going, maybe what I'm backing up. So the first thing that I always like to point out in these virtual machine backup jobs is that our deduplication is based on the job. Our deduplication is not a global setting. So the more VMs you put into a job, and the more similar those VMs are, primarily by OS and application, the better deduplication you're going to get, ergo the less storage space you're going to use. Now I've only got 2 VMs in this job. This is a lab that's already been set up. But the recommended maximum number of jobs to put in the maximum number of VMs to put in a job is 30. If you're doing per VM backup jobs, you can do up to 300, but again, we're not going to go down that right now. So we're just doing a standard job where all the VMs in this job will make up one backup file. And you don't want to put more than 30 in there. Things start to get a little squirrely, at least that's what the documentation says. Keep in mind also, you want the best deduplication, but the job is going to determine the frequency, the duration of the backups, and then where they're going. So if you have some VMs you're backing up once a day, others twice a day, or some VMs you're keeping for 30 days, some you're keeping for 60, going to different locations, you have to split those machines into different jobs. But where you can, group your VMs by OS and application and put up to 30 in there if you can fit them. All right. The exclusions tab here, so I can exclude some specific disk from the virtual machine that I'm backing up, maybe a VMDK I don't want to process. If I had added the machines in by a host, because you can pick virtual machines to back up by everything on a host or everything on a cluster or everything on a data store or VM tagging, then maybe you can specify a specific VM on that list you don't want to back up. For instance, when I add VMs here, again, maybe I want to add all the VMs on a specific data store, on a specific cluster, host, or a tag, right? So I've just added a few VMs here. It shows me the total size of these VMs. So here we are at the storage section. Now for smaller environments, most of this is going to be set and forget. The proxy selection, so backup proxy, this is what does the data moving. This is why we are agentless when we do VM level backups. The proxy is a service that communicates directly to the production host or cluster or SAN. And by default, it is the Veeam server. If you need to add additional proxies, which is something that we would have already done, you can specify a proxy to be used for a certain job, or you can just let Veeam pick which is most appropriate, right? You want to think about things like that when you have a lot of jobs or maybe proxies at different locations. You may want to look into Veeam proxy affinity. A little outside the scope of this, but you can select a specific proxy for a job, but in smaller environments, your Veeam server probably is the proxy. For Hyper-V environments, your Hyper-V server is most likely the proxy, and there's some rabbit holes I can go down there as well, but let's keep this quick and nerdy. So here's the repository that I've chosen these backups to go to. Pretty self-explanatory there. I've already created a repo. Now, the retention policy can be defined by the number of restore points that are in the backup chain or the number of days. So if you look at restore points, if you want to back up every day for 30 days, you could say 30 restore points, and you could schedule that to run daily at a specific time, and voila, you got 30 days of daily backups. I could also change this to 30 days here and keep the schedule at once a day, and I would have the exact same retention, right? I could also change this to hourly. Now I have hourly backups kept for 30 days. If I were to change this back to restore points, I would have 30 hours, right? Typically, I prefer days. I'm not very good with arithmetic, and it's usually more important for your backups to be kept for a specific duration rather than a certain number of points in a chain, right? So I hope that makes sense. The first backup, of course, is going to be our full backup. The other 29 are going to be the incremental changes. And then depending on our retention style, we'll see what happens to that full on day 31. So let's go down to this advanced tab here on the right. And we're going to talk about retention styles. So I'm going to start with reverse incremental. Typically, I don't see this in the field a lot. I won't say that I don't recommend it. It really depends. Keep in mind this is a very intensive I/O process. There's lots of read writes happening. I think double the amount of read writes as your forever forward, which we'll explain in a moment. Reverse incrementals, so you have a full, then you have the next day's incremental, and that next day's incremental is also injected into the full. What you get out of this is the full backup is always the most recent point in the chain. If you were to do it the other way, this is forever forward incremental. That means that every new restore point increment is the latest point in the chain. There's all kinds of passionate philosophical debates on which one of these is best. Typically, I prefer the forever forward incremental for short restore times, like 30 days, maybe 60 days. The longer your chain gets, the more chance there is for corruption. So if you think about having daily backups for a year, forever forward, that's 365 restore points. If there is a break in the chain, in the middle of that, and you want to back up something from, yesterday, you're not going to be able to because there's some corruption in the chain. There's a break in that chain. So when we have longer term backups, we tend to go with the forward incremental. So there's forever forward, which means that in our example, we have 30 days, right? On day 31, we just move that full backup into the next spot. So we never create another full, thus forever forward. That full backup is always just moving up to the next space every time it expires. If we decide to go with the forward incremental, then on a specific day of the week, we can either create a synthetic or an active full, and I'll explain the difference. A synthetic full is just a stitch up of the incrementals that are already there. It's not a roll up because those incrementals still exist on the repo, but we are taking those incrementals and we are rebuilding a full based on that day. So in this case, we have Saturday. You have to do a synthetic at least once a week. This happens on the repository, and if you're going this method, I recommend your repository either be formatted with REFS, or XFS. And for more information on that, I suggest you Google Veeam, REFS, or Veeam, XFS. It will save you some space on these synthetic full backups. Now what this is doing is this is creating independent backup chains. So this Saturday full is still part of my 30-day simple retention here, right? So Monday's a full, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are incrementals. Saturday is an incremental. But as soon as Saturday's incremental is created, we take all the other blocks we need to make that a full. So now you have Monday's full, Saturday's full, and then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday incrementals, and then again Saturday is a full. So you will have multiple full backups on your repository. You got to think about the first synthetic full created on Saturday will eventually reach where the original full backup was and take its place. But until that happens, you'll have multiple full backups. Hope that makes sense. Now you can also do an active full, and an active full comes from production. So this is like taking a brand new full backup, a snapshot or a checkpoint from production. It still has the same retention. So if you create an active full, like you can do this less frequently, like once a month, that doesn't mean that you have a monthly backup. What it means is you've created a backup on a specific day of the week or month or whatever, and it's still just part of this 30-day chain. Now you may be asking yourself, what if I want to keep backups for X number of weeks, months, years, sometimes referred to as GFS or grandfather, father, son? And yes, you can do that in the job. So I'm going to stick with synthetic fulls. Typically, that's what I recommend unless you're using a deduplication appliance. If you're using something like a data domain, an exagrid, there's some other ones out there that can't come to mind right now. But usually they recommend an active full, and there's a whole thing of why. But for your traditional Windows, Linux, NAS repository, synthetic full is probably the way to go. So we're going to say create a synthetic full on Saturday. Now keep in mind at this point, it's still part of this 30-day rotation. What I can do with that synthetic full is I can put flags on it. These are GFS flags, as I refer to them, or markers. So if I configure these, let's say keep that Saturday for 4 weeks. And I'll change this to that Saturday so that it lines up perfectly. Now I've already got a month here with these 4 weekly Saturdays. I want to keep monthlies for the year. So I'm going to change this to the last week of the month because I've already got a month here, right? And then maybe I have some HIPAA compliance. So I'm going to do 7 yearlies. And since I've already got a first year of monthlies, I'll change this to December, the end of the year. So everything's kind of lining up. I can go back once a day for 30 days, right? And we've done the scheduling here, right? The once a day, once an hour, whatever. But let's just say it's dailies. So dailies for 30 days, simple retention. Every Saturday synthetic will be kept on its own retention for 4 weeklies for the month, 12 monthlies for the year, and 7 yearlies. Now keep in mind, these are all full backups. There's a reason that we do that for performance and integrity of the chain. I know other softwares do not do that. We do. We have our reasons. And this is, again, why I recommend using ReFS or XFS. Using your repository with one of those file systems will negate just about all of the additional full backup space and really just need the incremental space for all of these full backups, okay? All right. So I know that was a lot. Hope you're keeping with me. Let's go back to the Advanced tab now that we're finished with retention. And let's talk about some of the other things here. So the maintenance window. So perform backup file health check. Now this is going to look for blocks that may be corrupted and swap them out on the fly. Does some auto healing at the repository level. Now this does not take the place of a feature called Sure Backup. And Sure Backup, if you don't know what it is, Google it, Veeam Sure Backup. I won't get into it here. This is not testing your backup. This is looking for blocks in the repository. This is pretty intensive from what I hear from some of my partners, but it is something you may want to run, especially if you're not doing Sure Backup. So look a little more into that if you want some more information. Full backup file maintenance. So remove deleted items data. You know, that's if you want to remove backups that are no longer being backed up. There's some more information on that, but I really want to focus on this defrag and compact full backup file. I suggest that you run this if you're doing forever forward. Now this also is kind of intensive on the disk repository. You don't have to do it, but with forever forward, keep in mind that full backup is always just moving up and always just adding whatever blocks it doesn't have. So after time, you know, it just gets a little jumbled, a little messy. So a little defrag, a nice little, you know, clean refresh, pruning of that full backup, you know, can be very beneficial. Okay, on to the storage section. So enable inline data deduplication. This is Veeam's dedupe, and we recommend this. Sometimes if you're using a dedupe appliance, we recommend turning this off. I would refer to the best practice document of whatever um, dedupe appliance you have. There's one with Veeam for the data domain, the exagrids, the store once, and the others. Exclude swap file blocks. So swap file blocks, that's where data is temporarily stored sometimes when memory is low. They can be a little big, so we typically recommend to not back those up. And exclude deleted file blocks, also known as dirty data blocks. So you can read a little more into that if you want to know what those files are, but typically these things are checked by default and you should just leave them alone. All right, now onto the compression level. So you read here, optimal compression provides best compression to ratio and lowest backup proxy CPU usage. So this is optimal. There's dedupe friendly, and each one of these you change. It'll kind of tell you what this is for, right? It's basically what it's saying is the higher the compression, the higher CPU usage of the proxy. So optimal recommended. I usually recommend the recommended, right? Makes sense. For the storage optimization, you can see the effect simply by switching, and you can kind of read, where it is recommended. From the Help Center, I'm going to read these off real quick. So local target large blocks. The block size is going to be 4096 KB. For local target, that's going to be 1024 KB. For LAN, it's going to be 512 KB, and WAN target is 256 KB. And again, you can see the effect that these are going to have based on the setting. You can also look these up in the Help Center. Just Google the question, Veeam storage optimization, Veeam compression level, and you'll be able to find all this information rather easily. For encryption, encryption is at the job level. We use AES 256, so you set a password. So here's a little note about encryption. If you recover an encrypted backup file from the Veeam server that did the backup job originally, you will not be prompted for a password because the password is stored in the Veeam server database. However, if you were to reinstall a new Veeam server because you lost your old one, and you connected it to a repository and tried to do a restore, then you would be prompted for a password. So something to keep in mind. And you'll notice this loss protection disabled. So unless you're using Backup Enterprise Manager, if you lose your password, it is unrecoverable. So if you forget what it is. Enterprise Manager is a separate product. It's free in most cases, and it can help you with like a hint to restore your password if you lost it. A little outside of the scope of this, but that's what that warning message is. Okay, so notifications, pretty straightforward. You can get an email for success warning failure. You can also do this at a global level from the main option for everything, but you can also do it on a per job basis. As far as vSphere integration, so we're going to show you guest application aware processing that Veeam can do on its own. However, if you have VMware tools, you can allow VMware tools to do its own quiescing as well. Typically, this is unchecked, and Veeam will take care of your application awareness on its own. Change block tracking, we can read through here. Change block tracking is a VMware feature that allows for faster incremental backup. So basically, we don't have to read the whole backup every time that we take one. So you'll still get your incremental changes even without CBT, but all of the data has to be read every time. So typically this is checked, and it's a good thing to have on. Onto the integration here. So if you have VMware and you have a SAN like a NetApp, Nimble, 3PAR, I believe the Fujitsu have this as well, the Dell EMC. There's a whole list. We have a universal API for a large list of the SAN vendors that we integrate with. If you'd like to check and see if your SAN device is integrated with this feature, you can go to our Veeam Ready website. So just Google Veeam Ready and search for your appliance. And so basically what the integration is backup from storage snapshot. And backup from storage snapshot, what it does is it triggers a regular VMware Snap just like normal, but instead of leaving that snap open on the host while we do the backup, we take a SAN snap, like say a Nimble snap or a NetApp snap that contains the original VMware snap. We move it down to the SAN level, and then we can release the snapshot from the host so that that snap doesn't have to be open while we're doing the backup. Again, this is for VMware. This is for specific SANs only, but there are quite a list, so go to that Veeam Ready website to see if yours is one. And you will need the Enterprise Plus edition of Veeam in order to take advantage of this. This is great for large VMs with high transactions, big SQL VMs and things like that. Okay, there's some of the things you can do within there. And you can run some scripts on the job as well, for your storage. You can get creative there, whatever kind of scripts you want to run. All right, so configure secondary destination for this job. If you have a backup copy job, you can add that in here. I've got one going to Cloud Connect. So you will need to create the backup copy job, but then you can link those two together. I'm just going to cancel out of that, go back in to my job settings, and we're just about finished here. So I think that was it on the storage side. We're going to go to the guest processing. So this is where I mentioned our application awareness. Veeam is application aware without any kind of agent. We use these temporary runtime processes specific to the application. So for instance, SQL, Active Directory, on-prem Exchange. I can pick a machine here, edit, and we can require application consistency for the job to succeed, which is recommended, or we can say try it, but if it fails, go ahead and run the job anyway. We can disable it altogether if maybe you're using SQL Manager or something like that to do your application awareness, but most of our partners find a lot of success with using our native tools. And whether you want to perform the transaction log processing, which we do recommend, grab all those logs. Now, the guest processing is done by something called the guest interaction proxy. Typically, this is just your Veeam server or your Veeam proxy by default, or you can specify one. And credentials are going to be passed to the guest OS that is being quiesced every time that this process runs. Now, if you would like, you can install a persistent agent on the individual guest machine you're backing up. And like it says here, this removes security and port requirements of the runtime process. So if you'd like some more information on that, once again, Google is your friend. Veeam persistent guest agent for more information there. For SQL specifically, we truncate logs by default. You can also back up those logs periodically. This will allow for a more granular rollback, maybe to a specific transaction in a SQL table. We also have this for Oracle. We also integrate with Oracle RMAN if you're a fan of using that. Here we can exclude specific files or folders from the VM backup job. Keep in mind this is going to take quite a bit longer because we're going to have to read through the whole VM every time we do a backup and exclude those. And once again, some scripts. So maybe you don't have SQL, maybe you have MySQL or Postgres. You can run some pre-freeze post-op batch scripts to do that same kind of quiescing. Okay, trying to wrap this on up here. So I mentioned the guest interaction proxy. Again, in smaller environments, this is a default. If you have maybe a hosted environment with a lot of customers and separated VLANs, you will need a guest interaction proxy for every VLAN. When VMware does a backup, it doesn't need to talk to the individual machines, it talks to the host. But if you want us to get inside the guest OS and do application awareness, we do need access to those VMs. So if those VMs are on a VLAN, the guest interaction proxy will need to be on that VLAN as well. Otherwise, you could use something like VMware Tools VIX, I believe is what it's called, for its own kind of application awareness. And these are the guest OS credentials you need. So for instance, your SQL server needs the SQL sysadmin fixed role. So whatever kind of credentials you need to talk to the database on that guest. Okay. And last but not least, scheduling. We've kind of already went over this, so we'll just end the video here. Once a day, on certain days, every hour, after a specific job has ran. I typically don't recommend this, daisy chaining jobs, because if you have specific SLAs and you have one job waiting on another job that's dependent on another job, and there starts to be some sort of stall or it's taking a long time to finish a job, it becomes a domino effect. So just be careful about using that option. Some other options here are pretty straightforward. And then it's just next and finish, and you sit back and you watch Veeam do its job, and you rest assured that Veeam is taking care of all your backup data. All right, so cue the obligatory thank you slide. And as always, we hope you've enjoyed this video, got something out of it, and we'll see you next time on Quick and Nerdy.